There's a certain kind of silence out here in the countryside that you just can't find anywhere else. It's not the absence of noise, it's the presence of peace. The kind of quiet that settles deep in your bones, wraps around your nerves, and lets your mind finally stop running laps. That's why I bought the ranch. After 20 years in the Special Forces, most of it in places I still hear in my dreams, I needed the quiet. I needed space. And more than anything, I needed to be left alone. So I picked a place far enough from the city that cell service gets patchy, but close enough that I could still get supplies without it turning into a mission. 50 acres of stubborn land, a weathered barn, a creek that actually sings when it rains, and a wraparound porch where I can drink black coffee at dawn with my 2 dogs asleep at my feet. No neighbors in shouting distance, no traffic, no sirens. Just the wind, the dirt, and the slow rhythm of life. For the most part, the locals respect that. They wave from trucks but don't stop unless they're invited. A few of them know who I am, at least the outline of it. Retired military, they say. I don't correct them, the full story's too heavy and it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not that man now, at least I try not to be. But peace is never permanent. It started small. Notes tucked under my windshield wiper when I drove into town. Complaints about property upkeep and visual consistency. I laughed at first, tossed them in the trash. Then the letters started showing up in my mailbox. Longer, nastier. They were signed HOA Compliance Committee, which would have been funny if it weren't so serious. You see, my property isn't part of the HOA, never was. That's part of why I bought it. But Karen didn't see it that way. Karen, blonde bob, permanent scowl, SUV with a vanity plate that says PR3 Sias. She runs the HOA like a tiny dictatorship, and apparently she decided my ranch was ruining her neighborhood aesthetic, even though her subdivision starts half a mile down the road and ends before my fence line even begins. I ignored her at first. I've dealt with far worse than an angry suburbanite with too much time on her hands. But there's something about the way she looks at my land, as if it offends her very existence, that made me pause. That kind of entitlement isn't harmless. It festers. And the thing about people like her, they always push until they're pushed back. I didn't move out here looking for trouble. But trouble has a funny way of finding you when you least expect it. At first it was just words. Karen's little letters typed in Comic Sans, printed on pastel stationery like she thought a daisy watermark would soften the venom. Your barn is an eyesore. Your fence doesn't meet county standards. Your property is negatively impacting surrounding home values. Each one signed with her title, President, Oak Hollow HOA. As if that meant anything out here. As if those flimsy little covenants extended past the cul-de-sac where everyone's lawn is the same length and their mailboxes are all painted regulation gray. I kept every letter. Not because I needed to prove anything, just instinct. That training never really leaves you. Document, record, observe, pattern recognition. And Karen was definitely falling into a pattern. After a while, the letters weren't enough for her. One Saturday morning, my buddy Mike came by in his mud cake pickup. We served together. He brought venison, I made coffee. We sat on the porch, not saying much, just being. It was damn near perfect. Until we noticed a white Lexus idling at the edge of my gravel driveway. Karen. She didn't get out, just stared, phone in hand, camera aimed. Later, Mike told me she followed him halfway back to town. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured she was just rattling the cage, but it kept happening. Anyone who visited, delivery drivers, friends, even the vet, Karen would be there, filming them, sometimes trying to block their cars as they left. She once asked a woman who came to clean my chimney if she had documentation to be on the premises. I walked down to her house the next day, stood at the edge of her pristine lawn, and laid it out simple. You don't have jurisdiction here. This isn't your neighborhood. This is private land. The next time you harass my guests, I'll be calling the sheriff. She didn't blink, just crossed her arms and gave me that tight-lipped smile she wears like armor. We all have to live here. Standards matter. Community character matters. I didn't respond. What was the point? Then the county showed up, a truck with an official. Zeal rolled down my drive one afternoon. 2 inspectors stepping out like they were expecting a meth lab. Said they were responding to a complaint about unpermitted structures and unauthorized electrical work in the barn. Of course, everything was in order. I had the paperwork from the day I moved in. Still, they took pictures, wrote things down. One of them, younger guy, actually apologized as he left. "She calls a lot," he said under his breath. Now it was official. Karen was using county resources to come after me. I could have made noise, filed something, but I didn't. Not yet. I figured she'd burn herself out. Most people like her need to feel powerful, and when they don't get a reaction, they move on to easier prey. But Karen wasn't most people. It was a Tuesday when she crossed the line. I was in the back pasture checking on my fence line when I got a motion alert on my phone. I pulled up the live feed from one of the perimeter cameras. There she was, Karen, on my property. Walking up the driveway like she owned the place, phone in one hand, clipboard in the other. She panned her camera across the barn, muttering things like blatant disregard for community aesthetics, total eyesore, unsafe structure. She circled my truck, poked around the porch, then marched up and started filming through the window. By the time I made it back to the house, she was on her way down the drive again, looking proud of herself. I stepped into view just as she reached the road. She flinched. Not because she was scared, because she got caught. "You're trespassing," I said, calm but firm. "I'm documenting a public nuisance," she snapped, raising her chin. "This kind of neglect affects all of us. You're a blight on this community." "I'm not part of your community," I replied. "That's exactly the problem," she hissed. Then she got in her car and peeled off like she'd just won away. Battle. I watched the dust settle, jaw tight. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about property values. It wasn't about fences or aesthetics. It was about control, and Karen wasn't going to stop until someone reminded her where the real boundaries were. It was just after sunset when I noticed something was off. The dogs were barking, low and sharp, not their usual curious woofs. I'd been working on my generator shed out back, hands greasy, but that bark cut through the twilight like a shot. That sound? That was a warning. I moved fast, heading toward the barn. I didn't even think to grab a weapon. I didn't think I'd need one. The barn door was wide open, and there she was, Karen, phone in one hand, flashlight in the other, pacing in tight, frantic circles like a woman on a mission. Her voice was raised, shaky, overly performative. "This is what we're dealing with. Filthy, unsafe conditions. You can smell the neglect. Who knows what he's hiding in here? Could be breeding pits, animal cruelty, drug operations." I stood in the shadow of the doorway, watching in stunned silence. She hadn't even heard me yet, too busy narrating her deranged little documentary. She panned the camera to a stack of feed, and then to a pile of old tack in the corner, zooming in and saying, "Evidence of illegal activity. Clear violations." That's when I stepped forward and my boots echoed off the wooden floor. She spun around, flashlight beams slashing across my face. Her eyes went wide, and for a second, we just stared at each other. I could see the panic bloom in her chest, the gears in her brain screaming, "Abort mission. You've gone too far. What the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked, voice low. I had to check," she stammered, clutching her phone to her chest. "There were reports of animal mistreatment. You can't hide from the community, forever. You broke into my barn. I was protecting the neighborhood." She bolted for the door. I didn't chase her. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, watching her retreat into the night like some unhinged ghost. Tires squealed on gravel a few seconds later. That night, I locked up tighter than usual. Every door, every window. The barn, the shed, even the gate got reinforced. I installed 3 more cameras by morning. Motion sensors, floodlights, the kind of perimeter setup I used to build in hostile zones. I called the sheriff and filed a report, but even he seemed unsure. "You didn't catch her in the act of damaging anything," he said. "She's technically just trespassing unless you want to push for something more serious." I wanted to, but something told me this wasn't the time. Not yet. The next morning, I found the meat. Raw hamburger. Sitting just past the fence line. Near the west gate. I nearly missed it, but one of the dogs, Scout, was already sniffing at it. When I pulled him back and got a closer look, my stomach dropped. Hidden inside were roofing nails. Dozens. Buried just deep enough to shred a throat or gut if a dog had swallowed it whole. Scout was limping, paw bleeding. He must have stepped on one before I caught it. I carried him back to the house, heart pounding, hands shaking with rage I hadn't felt in years. Rage I'd spent a long time learning to bury. The vet patched him up, said I got lucky. Another minute, maybe two, and it could have been fatal. I knew who did it. There was no question. Karen had escalated from lunacy to cruelty. She'd hurt my dog. That crossed the line. I brought the meat to the sheriff. He looked at it, cursed under his breath, but his hands were still tied. Unless you've got her on video placing it. I can't charge her with anything. That was the last time I planned to rely on the law to protect me. I didn't say a word to Karen, didn't storm over, didn't threaten her. That's what she'd expect. No, now I was done reacting. I started preparing. I replaced the old cameras with thermal night vision units. Calibrated the sensors to ignore raccoons but not humans. I cleaned my gear, the kind I hadn't touched in years. I walked my land like I was back on patrol, measuring lines of sight, choke points, cover spots. Karen thought she was poking a bear. She didn't know she was waking a sniper, and if she came back, I'd be ready. The night it happened, the air was dead still. No wind, no crickets. Just that eerie silence nature gives you right before something goes sideways. I was in bed, half asleep, dogs curled up at my feet when the alarm snapped me awake. Sharp, urgent. A motion trip. I sat up fast, heart already calm, breathing steady. That kind of training doesn't leave you. You don't panic. You assess. I reached for the tablet on my nightstand and brought up the security cams. There she was. Karen. Dressed, in all black. Sweats, hoodie pulled tight, sneakers laced. In one hand she carried a wooden bat. Not aluminum. Wood. Personal. Emotional. The kind of thing you bring when you want to feel the damage. She walked straight up my gravel drive and made a beeline for my truck. No hesitation. No creeping. Just full-on, eyes-on-fire crazy. I watched as she raised the bat and smashed the headlights. 1, 2. Shattered glass rained down. She hit the windshield next, didn't even crack, but she kept swinging like it insulted. Her eye exhaled slowly, flipped off the interior lights and moved. I didn't reach for a gun. Not yet. I knew the law, knew the limits. But I also knew how to make a statement. In the closet, I kept a modified Tipman paintball sniper rifle. Custom barrel, scope, high-pressure tank. Loaded with OC powder rounds, pepper spray and impact. Form, non-lethal but unpleasant in the extreme. Think riot control, but from 200 feet. I slipped on gloves, zipped up a dark hoodie, and pulled my NVGs down over my eyes. The world turned ghostly green and silent. The dogs stayed inside. I gave a hand signal and they obeyed. Good boys. I stepped out through the side door, silent as fog, boots finding every soft spot on instinct. No crunch of gravel, no clink of... Dear Karen had moved on to the barn. She kicked the doors open like she was storming Normandy and started trashing the inside. I watched her on the infrared feed from my wrist monitor as she swung wildly at my workbench, knocking over power tools, smashing my coffee thermos like it had personally offended her. She was yelling now. This is my neighborhood. You don't belong here. We build community, not this hillbilly garbage dump. Her voice cracked. Too high, unhinged, wild. I circled wide, used the terrain, stayed low. 40 yards out, I took position behind an old plow frame half buried. In brush, brought the rifle up, scoped her, steady breath, just like 1,000 times before. I flipped the spotlight mounted to the barn. It hit her like lightning, blinding, sharp, throwing her shadow 10 feet tall against the wall. She screamed, dropped the bat. Freeze, I called, voice low and deep. Command voice. Years of training stripped every bit of hesitation from... That sound stops people, but not Karen. She bolted. Bad move. She made it 3 steps before I tagged her. First round hit her thigh. She stumbled. Second round center massed her back. The pepper powder burst on impact, a bright orange cloud engulfing her as she dropped to her knees screaming. The sound she made, part rage, part confusion, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. She crawled toward the barn doors, gagging, clawing at her face, eyes burning. Help! Somebody help! He's killing me! Oh my God! I stepped into the light, slowly, deliberately. Rifle low but visible. Stay down. Don't move. Law's already on the way. She coughed and whimpered, trying to speak but barely getting words. You can't do this. You broke into my property. You came here with a weapon. You attacked my home. You're lucky I didn't choose live rounds. I wasn't trying to scare her. I was giving her clarity. Sometimes people like her don't get it until they feel powerless, until their fantasy of control gets shattered. I pulled out my phone, dialed the sheriff, and gave the report flat and simple. Trespasser on private land. Vandalism, attempted assault. Suspect is neutralized. You'll need medics. She's covered in OC powder but breathing. It took them 12 minutes to arrive. Longest 12 minutes of her life, I bet. She writhed in the dirt the whole time, moaning, wheezing. The lights from the barn made her look smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not the queen of the HOA, just a bitter, broken woman lying in the mess she made. When the deputies pulled up and saw the footage I'd queued on the tablet, their faces said everything. She tried to deny it at first, choking out nonsense about protecting the community. But one of the officers cut her off. "Karen, we've got you on 6 different cameras smashing up a man's property with a weapon. That's not community service. That's a felony." As they cuffed her and sat her on the tailgate to wait for medics, I stood at the edge of the barn with my arms crossed. She looked up at me once, eyes red, skin streaked with tears and pepper powder. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. She knew. The line had been crossed. And I wasn't just some quiet recluse anymore. I was the last person she should have ever pushed. By the time the medics arrived and loaded Karen into the back of the ambulance, the whole place was lit up like a crime scene from a TV show, blue, and red lights bouncing off the trees, uniformed deputies murmuring into radios, one officer walking the perimeter with a flashlight and shaking his head. Karen, of course, was still putting on a show, strapped to the gurney, face red and streaked. With tears and pepper residue, she was screaming hoarsely about how I ambushed her, told the EMTs I was a trained killer who stalked her like prey. Said I shot her just for being concerned about the community. She looked right at the sheriff and gasped, "He tried to kill me." Sheriff Mason's face didn't move an inch. The man had already watched the entire feed from my security cameras, every second from the moment she stepped onto my property to the moment she got tagged and dropped like a deer in headlights. He held up the tablet and turned to her. "Calmly, Karen. We have 6 angles of you smashing this man's truck, breaking into his barn and destroying his property with a bat. That's not community policing. That's a felony." She stammered something about planting evidence, but even the medics were rolling their eyes at that point. The footage told the story, better than I ever could, when I showed them the clip of her planting raw meat laced with nails, caught on one of my newer thermal cams from the tree line. Sheriff Mason's expression finally hardened. "You hurt his dog?" he asked, low and disgusted. Jesus, that was the final nail. Not just trespassing, not just destruction of property. Now we had animal cruelty on tape. The next few days were a whirlwind I hadn't asked for, but couldn't stop. Karen was officially arrested the next morning, after a brief hospital stay, charged with trespassing, destruction of property, false reporting, and felony animal abuse. The sheriff's department released a statement confirming the footage and evidence, and word spread fast. Turns out Karen had a pattern. Once the news broke, people started talking. A couple from a nearby development said she'd harassed their teenage son for walking suspiciously with a hoodie on. Another family came forward with claims that she'd sent a dozen complaint letters about the unapproved color of their trampoline. One guy, an older vet, told a local reporter she called code enforcement on him because he was letting dandelions grow like a criminal. None of them had the hard proof, but I did. The HOA naturally went into full damage control. First, they tried to claim Karen wasn't acting on their behalf. Then they backpedaled and said she had been acting independently and without approval. The board put out a statement condemning her actions and promising to review enforcement protocols. Didn't matter. The video was already out. I posted it anonymously, just a stitched-together version with timestamps and no commentary, just the raw truth. It hit local forums first, then Reddit, then the news picked it up. HOA president pepper-sprayed by retired sniper during armed break-in. The headline wrote itself. The footage of her screaming, "This is my neighborhood," while smashing headlights with a bat? That clip alone hit 3 million views in a day. People started making memes, edits with dramatic music, reaction videos. She became that Karen. By the end of the week, she was facing a civil suit from me, criminal charges from the county, and her name was all over the local papers. Her house went up for sale quietly, and rumor had it the HOA forced her resignation before her arraignment. No one came by to say they were sorry, not that I needed them to. The land was quiet again, peaceful, the way it was supposed to be. Scout recovered thanks to the vet's quick hands and a week of TLC. He's still got a little limp, but he wags his tail just the same. My other dog, Boone, hasn't stopped following me around since. Like he knows the danger's gone, but he's still on watch. Just like me. Some people don't understand what quiet means until they lose it. Karen tried to take it from me, but she learned the hard way. Out here, you don't come into a sniper's field unannounced. About a week after the storm died down, I was fixing the latch on the back gate when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. It wasn't the sheriff or reporters this time. It was a man I barely recognized, though I'd seen him a few times before, always a step behind Karen at HOA meetings. Never speaking, never voting, just there, shadow of a husband. He got out of a silver SUV, hands raised halfway like he didn't want to spook me. "Mr. Dalton?" he said, quiet but clear. I nodded, wiping my hands on a rag. Scout padded up beside me, tail low, watching the man like a hawk. "I'm Tom. I was Karen's husband." There was a pause. He shifted awkwardly on his feet. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything she did, for not stepping in sooner." I didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch. He seemed to need it. "I'm filing for divorce," he continued, "this week, and look, I know it doesn't change what happened, but I thought you should know. The house, it's in my name, has been since we moved here." I raised an eyebrow. "I've already had her removed from the deed. As of yesterday, she's officially no longer a resident of this community." That got a long, low whistle from me. "Evicted?" I asked, deadpan. "She didn't see it coming," he said with a grim smile. "Tried to scream at the lawyer, but she's staying with her sister now. County's still processing the charges. Her court date's next month." He paused again. "She won't be coming back. I promise you that." I gave a short nod. Didn't feel much like celebrating, but something inside me finally loosened. Like a knot that had been twisting in my gut for weeks had finally let go. A couple days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not another HOA threat. This one had an embossed seal and a respectful tone for once. It was from the remaining board members. Apparently, after public pressure and a healthy dose of embarrassment, they'd held an emergency vote. Karen's position had been officially dissolved. They issued a formal apology to me, signed by the entire board, and assured me in writing that no further actions or claims would ever be made against my property. Honestly, I should have framed it. Maybe I still will. The cherry on top came when Sheriff Mason stopped by on his own time. Not in uniform, just a man with a cup of gas station coffee and a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Just wanted to say," he told me, "you handled that whole situation with more restraint than most folks ever could. I've seen people lose it. Over a barking dog. You kept your cool through months of harassment and never once broke the law." He tipped his hat, gave a nod to the dogs. Glad you're part of this county. We could use more folks like you. After that, things finally settled. The land felt quiet again, like it had exhaled. The trees were just trees, not hiding spots. The night was just night, not a waiting game. Scout's limp faded. Boone went back to chasing squirrels instead of shadows. And me? I went back to my morning coffee on the porch. No alarms, no patrols, just the sun rising over my fields and the wind moving soft through the grass. Peace. That's all I ever wanted. And this time it finally stuck. War teaches you a lot of things. How to breathe through chaos. How to see before you're seen. How to wait, watch, and act only when the moment's right. But most of all, it teaches you this. There's always a line. You learn to live by it, protect it, respect it. And when someone crosses it, someone who thinks rules don't apply to them, someone who mistakes your quiet for weakness, well, sometimes you've got to remind them why that line exists. Karen learned that the hard way. I didn't want to fight. Hell, I moved out here to get away from all that, from the noise, the orders, the targets. I came for space, for silence, for the kind of peace a man only finds after he's seen too much. But peace has a price. And I paid it, patrolling my own. Land, reinforcing fences, keeping cameras rolling instead of fishing lines, until the night she broke in. Now the ranch is quiet again. No headlights where they don't belong. No angry letters in the mailbox. No HOA reps trying to control the dirt beneath my boots. Just the wind, the trees, and my boys, Scout and Boone, back to running the sow. Fields like they were born to. Sometimes I stand at the edge of my property as the sun dips low behind the hills, one hand resting on the old fence post, the other rubbing behind Scout's ears. There's a stillness out here you can't buy in a city. Can't fake behind a picket fence. You either earn it or defend it. I didn't ask for trouble, but if you bring it to my doorstep, swinging a bat, screaming like a storm, you better be damn sure you're ready for the one coming back at you, because if you come for a sniper, you better not miss.